today is gonna be a doozy, largely because I apparently didn't plan my time right, and I forgot, I guess, how close I was to posting this, which is Tempests and Slaughter, and is the first in the Numair Chronicles. The others just haven't come out. This one was published in 2018. It is now, as of today, 2023, so you'd have thought she'd at least have another one, but she doesn't. All that to say, I was finishing up with the Immortals, and then I said, let me tack on the Numair Chronicles, and I got the Immortals done, and the Numair Chronicles, I guess I thought I had more time, and I didn't. I think we should all give me a pat on the back for even getting this book in here, because if it is Tuesday for you, and it is Sunday for me, I read this book like every single, it's a 50-hour read. I read this book every single spare minute, and now I'm sitting down here to do an hour review. It'll probably be a 2 or 3 hour edit to get this video together. So you're welcome. It was probably one of the closest shaves I've ever done. Although, to be honest, I did postpone publishing of this review series twice so that I would have time to read the Numair Chronicles, or at least Tempests and Slaughter. That said, it's also a doozy because, like I said, it was a 15-hour read. That's a very, very large book. It's probably equivalent to the Beka Cooper series, which if you saw my reviews of the Lioness series and of the Immortals, which hopefully you did, considering this is at the tail end of the Immortals at least, you'll know one of my biggest complaints was her writing. It felt very juvenile. Beka Cooper is so much better and is still my favorite by far. She also has the Trickster's Choice duology, which is better, but it's still, you can see where she's got room for improvement. Tempests and Slaughter, it's very, very well written. Although, unlike Beka Cooper, I thought it was kind of boring. I read it when it first came out, and I thought I finished it. Apparently not, because I remembered like 10% of this book. And when I thought really hard, I'm pretty sure what I did was I started skimming. I do not remember the ending, so I either did not skim to the end or I never finished. And it's all to say because I did not understand the point of this book. That's when I think it's kind of important to read the Immortals first, even though you're out of order, because the main protagonist of Tempests and Slaughter is Arram Draper, who, once he becomes a mage, changes his name to Numair Salmalin, who is then Daine's mentor / lover, which, gross. Never gonna be okay with that one. We know from the Immortals that there's bad blood between Numair and Emperor Ozorn of Carthag, that they had once been best friends, but then something happened and Arram skedoodled and it was not under good terms. That is kind of what we're seeing here, is his relationship with Ozorn and then with Varys, who we also see at least in Emperor Mage, and his education, his magical education. So I know, I guess in the next book, we'll see more development, and then there's supposed to be a third book, which I guess is going to be the culmination of really why they had issues. But in this book, I didn't understand what the point was. I saw elements of Beka Cooper, but I felt like this book was most reminiscent of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I've also done a review on, in that she already had a story in place, and then she pulled another story from her canon so that we could get to know her world and her characters better, which is fine. But what I felt like both books lacked was time. What I really complained about from Song of the Lioness and the Immortals, or particularly Song of the Lioness, is her first book, this covered 4 years. And so I was like, no, you don't have enough time. So even though Tempests and Slaughter is like 4 times that size, so we were able to cover about 5 years of Numair's life, I don't think it really accomplished anything because she was trying to accomplish too much. I didn't really get a sense of Numair's specialty, We understand that he is not good with fire, or kind of in a sense, he's not good with simple magics. And then somehow his strength does lie within nature. He does not want to be a war mage, yet he's extremely powerful and he is capable of that, but he doesn't want to take lives. So we understand the vaguest of outlines as to his magic speciality, but unlike with Daine in the Immortals, where we're focused on her wild magic and how she can harness it and what she can do with it. With Numair, I was like, well, what kind of magic are you good at? And so I felt like there was a lot and we needed to pare it down so that we could focus on the important things, especially because we did cover 5 years. And then on top of that, we hit a ton of characters. I thought there was a lot going on with them that, again, we didn't really get to dive into. We had far too many teachers. And then we have Ozorn and we have Varys, who are Numair's closest and only friends, but we don't actually dive into that. In Emperor Mage, we meet Varys, and we know that he and Varys have some kind of history, a romantic history. And so in this book, we do see, I mean, she's an extremely beautiful woman, even from girlhood. So Numair has a crush on her from the get-go. So we get that thread, and then something does happen towards the end, but I didn't get to know Varys, except for the fact that everybody underestimates her because she prefers to do kind of female magic. She likes the kitchens. She likes to do home kind of things. And then with Ozorn, I think the problem with him is his father had been killed by Sarajetes. He holds this grudge against this people group, and it overshadows everything that he does and thinks and feels. But it's kind of like thrown at you here and thrown at you there, instead of really being an underlying theme for him. He has a teacher, Master Chioke, who is quite a good villain. You know he's not likable. You know he could be bad news for Ozorn. And we also see that Ozorn maybe doesn't see that, and he respects Master Chioke, but we don't get a sense of who Ozorn is. I don't feel like his friendship with Numair was fully developed because of all of the elements in this novel. There was no time for all the intricacies that she was trying to put into this book. And I did not know what the focus of this novel was, because every novel, first act, second act, third act, the second act, you have that midpoint where things change. We go from a reactive protagonist to an active protagonist, and then we have our climax, and then we have the denouement. I do not know what that midpoint was. What were we building towards? If we're gonna look at this series as it has a very, very, very end game, and that's what the exciting part is, well, every individual book needs to have its own very, very, very exciting part, which each Harry Potter book does. In each Harry Potter book, Harry eventually encounters Voldemort or some kind of evil force that is threaded itself through the novel that is building up to that climax. I do not know what that thread was in this novel that built up to the climax. Like, the climax we got, sure, it was exciting, but the individual or the antagonistic force and event, it was not present. It was not heavily present throughout this novel. And the really one interesting part, it got shelved because it's supposed to come in later in the series. And I was just like, please forgive me. Let me just give you the synopsis now, which this is not how I wanted my review to go. But yeah, we open very strongly with Numair, with Arram. He is at the arena, so gladiators, okay? He has never been here before. He has no friends, so he's never gotten to go before. His family is merchants. He is now at the academy in Carthage, which is where all the really powerful mages go. His dad and his grandfather have come and they're like, hey, let's go to the arena. He's like, this is super exciting because now I can take this story back to school and people will like me. He encounters these two strangers. They're having a chat. He realizes that the arena is magic to what it's not supposed to be. So he asks them about this, and one of them gets really aggressive because Arram is dumb enough to call him stupid. So he gets pushed into the arena, at which point he is rescued by, sorry, there's so many characters. He gets rescued by Gladiator Musenda. It's all well and good, but what he realizes is he does not like the games. He does not like the violence and the bloodshed, and this is just not his cup of tea. Back to him being at school, and he has caused trouble in one of his classrooms. The head of the school, Cosmos, and a couple of other powerful mages come in, and then like, you need to come with us. He's super afraid that he's going to get kicked out of school, but what happens is they realize he is not in the proper classes. He basically should have skipped a couple grades. This is when he moves in with Ozorn as roommates and he meets Varese. They're a couple of years older than he is. The one thing about this novel that I wished Pierce would have done, Numair is 10 when it opens, but he likes to tell people he's 11. Ozorn and Varese are 13. We do celebrate Ozorn's birthday at some point, and we get this, call me a middle school girl, I thought Numair's burgeoning sexuality was incredibly awkward. Like, I did not need to hear about his member. I did not need that word in this novel, particularly the number of times that it appeared. I did not need this little introduction about boys and their burgeoning sexuality. It was just super duper awkward, and in the end, it was unnecessary, except that I understand that Pierce is trying to establish his age and his physical growth. Aside from moments of delineation of saying, okay, well, it's this term and now it's this term, so spring, fall, winter, summer. But for me, particularly since I was listening to it, I did not retain that information very well, and I completely lost track of how old he was. So I would have liked for Pierce to have stated it outright. We never celebrate Numair's birthday. So I was just like, how old is he? I don't know. We don't even get in-depth looks at Arram Numair's classes. We get like 5 or 6 professors, and they're all teaching him different things, which will grow him in different ways. But like, we will start a charms class, or like, what is it? I don't remember what class it was, but he has a class with Cosmos, and he shares this class with Varese and Ozorn. And the point of this particular lesson is to learn how to draw a perfect circle, because they need to know how to draw a perfect circle in their magicking. And Varese is the only one who's any good at it because she works in the kitchen and she traces circles for pastries and whatnot. And then we just drop it. Like, we don't get, except when he is with Sibo, we do not get consistent education. And I thought those would have been really important for us to get a grasp on what he does well or what he doesn't do well, or what he's learning and what he's working on. Except all we get is this consistent mention of, you need to learn how to focus. You need to learn how to focus. And I'm like, we're 5 years in. Can he not focus yet? We get a lot of fluff, in my opinion, things that I thought we could have gotten rid of in favor of bigger scenes that could have built up a stronger storyline. We do meet Lindhall Reed, who is somebody that we're introduced to in Emperor Mage. Chioke, who I thought that he was a little underdeveloped, because we get it from the beginning. He's intimidating. And we get little inklings of, he's not the nicest person. And then it eventually grows into, he's something sinister. But I was like, who is he? Except that he is Ozorn's master. We meet Cosmos, Sibo, Fazi, and then there's another subplot of how Ozorn is called the leftover prince because I guess there were 7 in line before him. But when he was young, he didn't realize that. He just thought he was going to be emperor one day. And his uncle sits him down and is like, you see all these guys here? They're in front of you. But little by little, they are getting whittled down until this point where there's only 2, Silhouettes and Mikram. And then we meet other mages / teachers, Dagani, Hulak, Ramasu, and Yadin. I can tell you who Sibo is, who Dagani was, Cosmos was. I could tell you I recognize the name Yadin, and then I could tell you who Faji was. But even with her, I didn't know what she taught. All I knew is kind of what happened with her and that he liked her as a teacher. We also then meet 2 new roommates. At a certain point, our trio goes from the lower school to the upper school. At this point, we meet Diop and Lamin. I believe Ozorn is actually back home because one of the other heirs has died. And so he's called home for mourning, but this guy was not important enough, or there was something wrong with him that the emperor was like, you guys don't need to mourn. We're just going to do like a really truncated mourning here, and then we're going to be good. But Arram / Numair meets Diop and Lamin. And Lamin is Surajit, which is one of the people group that Ozor cannot stand. So I'm sitting here thinking, holy cow, we're getting into something good, especially because they're older. They're like 16 or so. And I believe Numair is like 12 or 13. I have no idea. So 1, they're extremely mean to him. And 2, as soon as Ozorn comes back, fireworks are going to erupt. We never, except for the very superficial explanation as to the fact that he is younger and they do not think they should be sharing a room with him, do we get a good reason as to why these 2 do not like Numair. We do get, like a year or so down the road, Numair goes to help with something and Lamin is sitting right next to him and they like bond. Whoa. What's going on here? Like, are we gonna then blame all of this meanness on Diop? Like, how is this happening? Nothing, absolutely nothing, but I'll get to that later. I was waiting because Ozorn has such a hatred for the Surajits. I was expecting, as soon as he shows up and finds out, something big to happen. Nothing. He doesn't even request for them to get a different room. Like, there's no fight. The only thing that happens is eventually the 2 older students pick on Arram to the extent that Lindhall is like, oh, you need to move into my quarters. So he moves Arram and Ozorn into wherever he's living. These are those little things that have weakened this novel that could have been something big. Like, why are we building up Ozorn's prejudice against a people group? And then when we finally encounter him actually encountering someone from this people group, nothing happens. He berates and abuses stall workers at the market because he thinks they're Surajit. He has no proof that they're Surajit. But somebody who actually is, he's just like, huh? Anyway, around this time, Arram adopts a pet bird that he names Preet. I think it's a sunbird. Whatever it is, Arram, through his teachings from Sibo, like they do a lot on the river bottom. They can spell themselves so they can walk underwater. And he has met basically the crocodile god, Enzi. And Enzi was something else that I was like, what is Enzi's point? He was kind of a conduit to point out certain things, but like he really had no purpose himself. Enzi shows up in Aram's room one night with this bird on his back, and Aram's like, hey, you know if you have a bird on your back, right? He's like, oh, yeah, I guess I couldn't feel him when I was in the Divine Realms, and he must have just hopped onto my back. but can you keep him for me? He is one of these other gods' favorite animals or something, and so I can't take him back until I have an appropriate gift. Years pass, and he still hasn't brought this bird back to the divine realms. And he's like, oh, have you ever tried to find the perfect gift for a god? This all seems really, really weak to me, especially because Preet serves no purpose. I'm assuming Preet is going to become a bigger deal in another book, but for this book, we needed Preet to mean something. Basically, Preet is just really annoying and everybody likes it except for Chioke. What is Preet doing to save you or help you grow? Nothing! There's this little scene where Arram is woken up in the middle of the night by, I think it was Daine. Again, there's so many mage masters, I can't keep them straight. It's pouring down rain. Daine is like, hey, we've got to go to the arena because I guess some kind of stones broke. I tried to rewind this part and I still had no clue what was happening. But I guess Daine needed Arram because Arram is extremely powerful and he needed to borrow some of Aram's magic in order to reshape stones for whatever reason. We do encounter Musenda again, and Musenda was my favorite character. Again, I kept expecting something to happen with him because he's a gladiator and he means a lot to Arram. He is a very popular gladiator by the end of the novel. I kept expecting Danger Will Robinson, and there was none. And I was just like, where is my suspense? Overall, this little stone scene was pointless. But from there, we get Arram being called by Ramasu, and I think Ramasu is the mage who helps him with his healing magic. And so these are the only ways that we see Arram honing his skills, is when his teachers are like, let's go on an expedition. But while we're on this note, we have a small moment where Arram is late for class or late for meeting somebody. He decides to jump a fence into like an herb garden, not realizing there's like a line of jars on the other side of this like wall. It wasn't a fence, it was a wall. And he crashes into them and he breaks them, at which point he meets the gardener, like the master, as punishment and as repayment for what you've broken. Like, you need to help me here with all of the stuff that I do. Did we ever see this come into play ever again? No. I guess we can assume that Aram's ability with herbs comes from the fact that he's spending time in the gardens and the greenhouses, but unless all these guys are coming to play in the second book, like, we just didn't need them. Anyways, he is called into the city because he's good at grinding herbs. Is this just an excuse? Like, is his teacher actually going to use him for some other purpose, but this is what he had to tell people in order to get Arram out of the school and into the city? No, it's because he's really good with a mestle and porter and messel, pestle and mortar and pestle. Oh my gosh! And it's not even 1 o'clock in the morning, guys. We are mid-afternoon right now. Wowza! And this is going back to Aram's ties to nature. I guess when he grinds up the herbs, 1, he can kind of reinvigorate old herbs. But 2, I guess, imbues them with his power, which makes them stronger. So, he's sitting there, and I guess, like, he does this all night, but he loses himself in it, which is very, again, reminiscent of the Immortals with Daine, where she kind of loses herself in her animal magic. I don't know if he physically, like she does, like turned into a tree or something. In any case, this is when he runs into Laman again, and I thought this was a really nice moment. I do not know where it came from, but I thought this was a nice moment because it shone light onto Ozorn's prejudice and the fact that he hates a people group for the wrong reason. What had happened to his dad was his dad had gone into battle and had been killed by Sarajits. What actually happened was his dad was trying to prove himself. So these two tribes within the people group have a scuffle. It's something that they could have worked out themselves. That's what tribes do. They scuffle. But his dad, wanting to prove himself, goes out and massacres everybody, from the old to the young. Lama knows this because he had been visiting family, and the family had gone to the city to go to the market or something. So he sees this young woman who offers Ozorn's father a drink. Lama's grandpa's like, we gotta get out of here. And once they've gotten out of there, what he explains to them is that this young woman had actually been part of one of those tribes that had been massacred. What their tradition is basically an eye for an eye. She poisoned Ozorn's father for what he had done to her tribe. Naturally, she dies as well. Like, the entire city is burned to the ground or whatever. Ozorn's father did not die in battle. Ozorn's father died for something he shouldn't have been doing. And now Ozorn and his mother had so much potential, but again, she felt very surface level. Like, what was her name? Mahira. It's like she was both weak and strong. She had this really strong prejudice against this people group. She had these really high expectations for her son, but she couldn't take care of herself. She needed Ozorn's help all the time. So I thought she was a contradiction, and I kept waiting for her to come out as pretending. I needed her to be one way or another. I did not understand her characterization at all, but she became a stronger and stronger presence within this novel the further we got into it. And I was just like, I do not understand what's going on here. Arram comes back, and this is kind of the first time that Varys shows him affection. She just kind of gives him this quick peck on the mouth, and he's like, I don't really know what to do with this, but okay. From here on out, we'll just get into that. She shows him these little bits of affection. He has no clue. And then this is something I thought we really could have dived into with. He does have a relationship with this one girl, but I was like, when did they actually start their relationship? Because he's in the library studying. Ozorn and Varys walk away for something. This girl shows up, asks him an innocuous question. I guess it's supposed to be just a really silly way to start talking to him. And I guess they start a relationship. I have no idea, because we just leap from semester to semester. And so all of a sudden they've been together for a couple of months or something, but they have nothing in common and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, what? But I thought this whole thing with him and Varys, we needed more. We needed to see them interacting and dancing around each other, or about him learning about females. We learned all about his member, but I was like, I want to see Arram as a young man interacting with young women, or talking to Ozorn about how do you approach girls. Instead, it was just he was so focused on his studies, but then there's Varys, who he's madly in love with, and he's super jealous of anybody she comes in contact with. The end events of the book happen, and he comes home, and she's like, oh my gosh, I missed you so much. And they basically have a makeout session, and she's like, I've been waiting for you to do that forever. If I'd known it was for me to kiss you first, then I would have done it a long time ago. Ugh, it was, I don't know. So Fozzie, there's a point where Arram is approached by Cosmos, and Cosmos is like, look, we have a scheduling issue. This teacher over here wants you this amount of time. So that means that you have to drop one of these 2 classes. He says, well, I'm gonna keep advanced charms because I want to stay with Fozzie. And I was like, who is Fozzie? Because the only female teacher I can remember is Daine, only because we have this huge focus on her physical attributes. I still don't know who Fozzie was. I don't know if Fozzie was actually a teacher, if Fozzie was like some advanced student. I have no idea. But that's when Cosmos tells him, oh, well, actually Fozzie is gone. Like, Fozzie's leaving. Chioke found her a better paying position elsewhere, and she's leaving. We'd had a little moment earlier in the novel where she and Arram had been talking about lightning snakes, which I actually still a little fuzzy on what those are. I'm feeling like they're the branches of lightning, and they react to certain people, or certain people can harness them, call them. Then there's a moment where he is forced to partake in a class with Ozorn and Chioke, and Chioke is trying to get him to basically do battle magic. A storm kicks up, kind of calls these lightning snakes to himself, and he has this interaction with them. Fozzie comes running out, and she's like, oh my gosh, I saw what happened, and she's all excited. And then we get this debate between her and Chioke as to kind of tribal magic and the validity of lightning snakes and blah, blah, blah. But now she's been called away. A couple months go by. Enzi shows up and he tells Sibo and Arram that they need to come with him. He takes them to this point in the river over by the palace, and there's this thing poisoning the river, and it's cloaked in magic, so it's kind of like a black hole, but there's actually something there. Turns out that it's Fozzie. Somebody had murdered her, which I forgot to mention, that the other guy in line to the throne, Stillowitz, he's died. He is like an admiral in the Navy, and he and his guys had gone off to sea. This massive storm had happened, but what Arram had noticed was there was no lightning at the school. There was thunder, but there was no lightning. Stillowitz dies, and now we have this thought that maybe it wasn't natural, or maybe it was just my thought. But once we find Fozzie at the bottom of the river, it's kind of like, maybe what happened to Stillowitz wasn't natural. So this is our first real inkling that maybe somebody is knocking off all of the Emperor's heirs. Since we know Ozorn eventually becomes Emperor, my thought is naturally, is it Ozorn? He might only be 15 or 16, but is it Ozorn? And then I'm like, well, maybe it's Ozorn's mother, or maybe it's the Emperor. Maybe his game in life is to have Ozorn succeed him. We don't know, but I did think that was a good moment where we're like, all of these other heirs dying seemed natural until now. And now we have to start wondering. So I did like that moment. And I did like when we found Fozzie, except I was like, who was Fozzie? Well, I want to know. If she's this important, why was there no other emphasis? Like, why did we have to have 10 teachers when we could have had 4, or we could have had 3? We could have had Cosmos, Sibo, Fozzie, and then we could have had like 1 more. And that way I could have gotten to know his teachers, so that when Fozzie disappears, I could have cared. But now Arram's question is, did Fozzie have something to do with it? Did somehow she get pulled into murdering Stillowitz because she could harness the lightning snakes? We wrap it all up with Arram being called back to the arena. He has to learn healing magic, essentially. Like, he has to learn how to heal in the field. Ramasu, I believe. I still don't know. There's so many of them. He's like, look, this is not something I like to do. I know this is not something you like to do, but this is something we have to do. They're kind of in the trenches. They're healing people. And then a gladiator corners Arram when he's alone in the healing tent one night. The thought is that this gladiator wanted access to like the good stuff, like the good meds. This interaction is interrupted, but the gladiator threatens Arram. I don't know what happened here. Maybe I was trying to fall asleep and I chose to try to listen to this while I fell asleep because, as I said, I did not find this book very interesting. Like, I kept waiting for something to invest in, and it felt like a day-to-day account of Arram's life versus a story with a point. We do have Arram overhearing this gladiator accepting money, accepting some kind of a bribe from Chioke. And I'm like, okay, is this it? Is he gonna have Musenda killed? What does Chioke want? We still never find out, but not too long after that, Arram and Ozorn are in the healer's tent, and this gladiator finds them there. He basically threatens their lives. His story is that he and all these other guys that he's gotten to back him up want to get out of town. I don't know. I guess the initial plan was not to have Ozorn there, but it was to use Arram as leverage for Ramatsu to meet their demands so that they could get out. I thought it was kind of messy, but Ramatsu shows up and he's like, you know, this is not gonna work. Some assistant or other had gone for help, and so unbeknownst to Arram, other mages were out there putting a sleep spell on the tent, but the gladiator gets hold of a weapon, is gonna kill Ozorn, and Arram, mirroring what he'd done in the beginning when he caused havoc in his classroom, because what he'd done was they were working with water magic, and he had brought water magic out of the ground, and he did not know how to contain it. So now that he's older and he's stronger and he knows how to harness his magic better, he's like, hey, I can use that to help me here. He knocks this gladiator out with this like jet stream of magic from the core of the earth, only for Ramatsu to be like, oh, didn't you trust us? Well, no, I wouldn't have trusted him either, because they were taking their sweet time. That's that. And that's when Arram comes home. That's when he and Varese have their makeout session. And then I was just like, are we not putting the pieces together? There's zero mention of the convo Arram overheard between this gladiator and Chioke. If I'm putting the pieces together, why aren't you putting the pieces together? Finally, I think Ozorn says something, and Aram's like, do you really trust Chioke? He gives him this whole story. Ozorn's like, well, that's great. Now I have something to hold over his head. And I was just like, that was it? And that is where we end. What was this story about? It's like she has an end game, but the build up to it isn't what it needs to be. Like, I have a feeling the final book is going to be the exciting book, the book where everything happens. And these other two books, this one is going to cover maybe the first half of Aram's education. The second book will cover the other half, if not like, if this is the first 3/4 of his magical education, the second book is going to cover the last fourth, as well as maybe his first years on his own. And then the third book, something's going to happen where Arram is going to have to make his decision. I thought what would have made this book successful was focusing on the whole Fozzie, Lightning Snake, all the heirs keep dying subplot. I thought it would have been really smart if we get the first half of the book with Arram entering the academy, being completely overwhelmed, then realizing he has potential. He has a lot of talent. Developing that talent, meeting Ozorn, meeting Varese, kind of getting this idea, because he's kind of a country bumpkin, kind of getting a fuller picture of royal life and what Ozorn is looking at with his royal future. Then slowly realizing all of the heirs are dying. And then, because we've been developing Fozzie gets called away, Fozzie disappears. Fozzie had a talent that had something to do with one of the heirs dying. And so now we are diving into what that means. I thought the climax should have been with Musenda, because maybe Musenda was too much of an ally to the good guys. Maybe Musenda knew something he shouldn't. But I thought we should have had this plot to get rid of Musenda, if anything, because he didn't make the games any fun, because he was too much of a good guy. And maybe the Emperor was just like, I'm over this dude. And that's, again, developing the Emperor, and we're kind of understanding that he's not such a great guy, or, you know, and maybe this is gonna rub off on Ozorn. Like, I needed more of Ozorn's mindset change throughout this. So, there we go. I hope you enjoyed this. I would love, love, love to know what you guys think. Do you agree with this assessment? Or do you feel like this was a great introduction to Numair/Arram? There we go, and I will see you on the flip side. Bye.